the watchful eyes of party agents and observers and began the careful process of counting votes. The Commission is extremely pleased with the way in which voting proceeded throughout the country. Voting proceeded without serious incident in almost all areas, and the most significant challenges faced were mainly as a result of the high turnout at voting stations and voters voting where they were not registered. Very high volumes of voters were reported in metro areas throughout the country, including Tshwane, Johannesburg, Durban, Nelson Mandela Bay, and Cape Town. This resulted in lengthy queues in a number of voting stations. In some of these areas, voting is still continuing as election officials ensure they allow all voters who were in the queue at 9 o'clock to complete their votes. At one voting station in Durban Metro in KZN, there were over 1,200 voters still in the queue after 7 p.m. tonight. Imbalances in the distribution of ballot papers, accustomed by Section 24A process, which allows voters to vote at voting stations other than where they are registered, were reported in a number of cities. This resulted in temporary shortages of ballot papers and the VC4 forms at some stations. In most cases, additional stock was able to be rapidly deployed from reserves or from other voting stations. In most cases, any delays were dealt with within 30 minutes. However, there were instances where longer delays were experienced, but these were isolated and a very small minority. The longest a station was unable to continue with operations due to shortage of ballot papers was 2 hours at a school in Ward 57 in KwaZulu-Natal. Other challenges experienced include power outages in a number of areas, which affected voting after dark and has delayed the start of counting. We are working closely with Eskom to ensure power is restored swiftly to affected areas, which include parts of Tabazimbi in Limpopo and certain parts of Rustenburg in the northwest. Counting of tens of millions of provincial and national ballot papers will now continue throughout the night into tomorrow. The Electoral Commission would like to thank the South African voters who showed patience, tolerance, and dignity in exercising their right to vote today. Our country has again showed that we have much to be proud of as a nation, that our democracy remains strong and vibrant, that a new generation is building on the foundations of 1994 to participate in our democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to announce that we have our first result in. It is from Umzimvubu in Mount Aleph in the Eastern Cape. Where's the general? My signal. Where is it? You should now see it reflected on our boards behind us. Thank you very much.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, the first results for the 2014 national and provincial elections, ushered in just before midnight. A historic record indeed. On that note, Chairperson, thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I know it's a momentous occasion. If I was in my father's village, I'll be adulating and ensuring that these results get the applause. Ladies and gentlemen, can we applaud as we receive the first results of the 2014 national and provincial elections? I'm going to open the floor for questions. As we were doing the past 48 hours, introduce yourself, the name of your organization, pose a question. Let us try not to repeat. We're enjoying the results as they're coming through. Let me take the first batch of questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Konita Hansa from the New Age newspaper. 3 very quick questions. My first is just for our, as journalists, how do we monitor where those votes are actually coming from, which is not reflected on this leaderboard here? Secondly, we've heard you admitting that there were some problems reported, even though you said that they were isolated. Speaking to party agents here on the side, they say that there's been how soon will you deal with these objections? And thirdly, can you give us in a sense of any punitive measures decided on today as a result of irregular or improper activity from party agents or even members of the public and IEC officials? Thank you very much.
My name is Njanje Chauke from SABC TV News. I just want to find out if received reports of incidents of non-voting in the Marikana area, where potential voters were not given ballot papers for their provincial vote. I just want to get clarity with regards to that, if you received any reports to that effect. And then I've just received a call from KwaDukuza in KwaZulu-Natal, where someone from the ANC saying someone has just shot one of their colleagues. A person has just been shot and killed as we speak outside a polling station in KwaDukuza, if you have received any reports, because you're saying there were no major incidents. Thanks.
Okay.
Testing. There we go. Good evening. Kathy Mutlatlana from E-News Channel Africa. Just in terms of voter turnout, how soon are we actually going to have a final figure? I know that you're saying that there's been a greater turnout in urban and metro areas, but how soon are we going to have a total tally of what the turnout is? And particularly with regard to Limpopo, what has voter turnout in that province been? We're getting some reports that about only 34% of people that were registered to vote there have actually turned up to vote. But of course, you guys would have the final and official figures.
Can we have a microphone here, please?
My name is Ntebo. I'm with the SABC Radio News. In the previous briefing, or in the last briefing, the chairperson told us that around 260 complaints have been lodged with the IEC, and over 250 of them have been dealt with. I wish I could know, in comparison to previous elections, can we say that this is the lowest number of complaints, or this is the highest number of complaints? 260 of them, 250 have been dealt with. Thank you.
Let me take the last question before I give a moment to the panel to respond to them. Any last take before I go? All right, let me take one more hand at the extreme right.
James from Beeld. Just simple question. Why is there 2 more votes there than there is there? Just for clarity's sake. And then what my colleagues have mentioned, there does seem to have been some concern about issues at voting stations in the Western Cape. I understand many opened late. In the previous media session, you said about 5% of all the voting stations there was problems. That's about 1,000 voting stations across the country where there were problems experienced. Could you just confirm that number? Thanks.
Let me allow the panel to take to respond to the questions before we take the second and last round of questions to be raised.
Thank you very much. I want to deal with the issue related to the objections. I suggested earlier on that there are various provisions within the law dealing with the issues of objections. Firstly, there is an aspect relating to Section 41 within our legislation. Section 41 deals with objections that can be laid at a voting station to the presiding officer, and the presiding officer can then deal with those objections. Section 48 deals with the sorting of the ballot papers at a voting station, and Section 49 deals with objections pertaining to counting. So, in terms of the way the legislation is structured, 48 and 49 will be dealt with by the counting officer. Now, at this stage, we would not know how many of those objections have been made. But the presiding officer, as well as the counting officer, have a responsibility to deal with the objections pertaining to that. However, if a party objecting is not satisfied and wishes to lodge an objection pertaining to Section 55, Section 41, 48, 49 can be escalated to the Commission for Commission to deal with that as Section 55. Now, Section 55, in terms of our legislation, deals with issues that we regard as objections that are fundamental to the finalization of the results. So if a party feels that a particular result will affect the determination of a result, then they can object to the Commission, and the Commission will deal with those issues. At this stage, we have not received any objections related to Section 55. But from our side, we are ready as a Commission to deal with all those issues. We understand that objections that do not necessarily mean that there is a crisis. There is a provision within the law to deal with those issues, and as soon as we receive them, we will deal with that. We've got an infrastructure to deal with all those issues, and as soon as they arrive, we will deal with them. All other issues, I think, probably the CEO might want to deal with them.
Good evening, distinguished members in the House. There were a number of questions. The first one dealt with how do we monitor where the votes come from? We have provided the media with apps. We have provided computer equipment at the back and political parties with computers where results will be shown by province, and you have the ability to drill down into municipalities and to drill even further down into wards and later into particular voting stations, voting districts, let me say. Every one of this will have a result slip, and that result slip is going to be scanned into the system. You would be able to see from the result slip what party agents signed for at the voting station and what we captured into the system, that result which was audited by the independent auditors that we have auditing every result slip. And in terms of this arrangement, every one of the media represented in the House, accredited, provided with facilities, has the ability or the capability to pull that first result. You would be able to pull that first result and even see why there may be a discrepancy. And I give an example. I haven't seen that result slip. But it may be, for example, and it will often be at times, that in the National Assembly ballot, you have 29 parties that are contesting. But in the provincial ballot, you have less than 29 political parties. And therefore, it is very possible for the result on the of the ballot of the National Assembly in certain instances to be different. It may even be in all instances to be different from the ballot of the provincial legislature. I'm saying that to say that the provincial ballot result is not the same for the voting station as that of the National Assembly, it's not a valid reason. One has to see the result slip. We will capture the result as it is indicated on the result slip. Objections that we have received, the Commission has not received or had not received any objection by the time we came here. When I say had not received, I'm talking about the office here handling objections. In other words, those objections that the Vice Chairperson of the Commission had said had been considered at the voting station. If someone was not happy there, where they would have escalated them to the Commission, that has not happened up to now. Ma'am, you said every party has objected other than the ANC. There has not been an objection. But every party, including the ANC, have put in complaints and we have dealt with those complaints. I'm not aware of, we receive these complaints from everyone and we adjudicate them as we should. There was a question about failure to provide ballot paper or 2 ballots in Marikana. That information has not come to us throughout the day, and I imagine that even party agents that were there have not raised it because we deal with these matters with political parties on a regular basis in our meeting there. KwaDuguza, we have not had that information, and I must say to you, in the last hour, we've been in contact with all of our provinces and assessing this information. And if indeed shooting happened in the vicinity of the voting station, the police will deal with that matter. Voter turnout, this information will not come now. Every result will come through, and when that information is aggregated, we will know voter turnout, because we will look at all of the result slips, all the votes that have come together, and we'll be able to tell South Africa how many people have voted in this election. So we will know that when the last result is received in the center. There was an issue about two more votes. Okay, that I have answered that question, and I think that was the last question that we were dealing with.
Just in addition to what the CEO has said, the question from Built, and our answer here is speculative. It could be that there was a person or there were people who voted outside their province and only got a national ballot and not a provincial ballot. That could explain the reason why the national result is higher than the provincial result. Or it could be that there were spoiled ballots as well. So this is just speculative. As the CEO has indicated, we'll have to, the reasons will be known once we've gone there. Thank you.
I'm going to be taking the second and last round of questions before we wrap up this evening's press briefing. If there are no hands also, I'm happy. Let me take the last round before I close off. Looks good. Looks like we're good. On that note, do I see a hand? All right.
Just another bite at the question. Doing my maths, I'm just asking if you can confirm that, you mentioned earlier about 5% of the polling stations you experienced troubles. That's about 1,100 polling stations across the country. Is that figure more or less accurate? And it does seem that there's some serious reports coming out, especially from the Western Cape, ballot boxes broken open. Also Limpopo, I understand. Could you give us an idea? I mean, you've mentioned there were complaints, and some have been unresolved. What type of complaints have you gotten that remain unresolved? Thanks.
All right.
Hello. My name is Dr. Adam from ITV Networks. I'd like to just ask two questions related to one another. One is, when do you expect, say, about 80% of the results to be in, so we can get an idea of which is the winning parties and what the final results are? And by when do you expect almost all the results to be in? Thank you.
All right.
Mike Luniga, the Media Connection. There is a paragraph here which talks about imbalances in distribution of ballot papers. Then it calls for the concern in terms of, didn't we understood in the beginning the number of people who will be voting in that voting station, or we were caught with our pens down because more people decided to go to that voting station?
All right. If we can take, there's a hand in front.
Ntebo Mokoba again. Let me try it once more. My question, it seems, it wasn't answered. I asked whether that there were 260 complaints that were lodged with the IEC, and 250 of them were addressed. My question was, can we say this is the lowest number in comparison to previous elections?
All right. We'll look at that in table. I think that's it.
No, one last question over here.
Where are you? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's allow you.
Shanti Abubaker from Independent Newspapers. Just one last question on how you will be measuring spoiled votes and whether it'll be shown on the screens at all. Thank you.
On that note, if I may allow the panel to deal with the last questions.
Let me deal with the issue of the imbalances in the distribution of ballot papers. We've been at pains trying to explain that we've got a provision in law. It is in terms of Section 24A in terms of Section 24A, the provision is that a person is allowed a vote and is allowed to cast a vote in a district where they are not registered. We've been saying this consistently. Now, let me give an example of what I'm talking about. If at a station A, 100 people had registered to cast a vote, when you plan your materials, the distribution of materials to that station on the basis of 100 people at that station. But because of the Section 24A, which says you are allowed in law to allow other people to come from other areas to come and cast a vote at that station that already has a material for 100 people, it is likely to have an impact on that registration on that voting station. So the imbalances that we are talking about here are the imbalances that have been created as a result of people moving from one area to the other and people trying to shop for shorter queues. So essentially that's what has actually happened in relation to that issue. Now, the second issue I wanted to respond to relates to the number of complaints. I've suggested to you that there are various provisions within law that deals with complaints as well as objections. At this stage where we are, we do not know. We've got, remember, 22,263 voting stations. We don't know what complaints have been received by the presiding officers at each and every voting station we have. We do not know how many objections have been received by our presiding officers at each and every voting station. So it is too early in the day. After we've done everything, after all the results have been received, we will be in a position to tell you how many complaints were there, how many objections, and under what section each objection was laid. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems the more we spend time talking here, the more results are coming through. I see the numbers are changing on the screen, which means that there are more results that are coming through. We missed responding to the question of the numbers of complaints that we had received. Earlier this afternoon when we reported, we had indicated that we had very minimal number of complaints. But it was too early. Of course, we indicated that at that point, those were the numbers. I'm afraid I don't have the new numbers. We were satisfied with the amount of complaints not being very high. That was the point, but it was no point of saying they are the lowest in an election. We will be able to make that determination when we wrap up the results and we deal with these matters. The issue was raised about 5% of problems that we may have had in the nation, voting stations. Built. I don't know where the 5% comes from. It didn't come from us. Oh, yes. Okay. No, we were addressing opening of stations in the morning, and we basically gave reasons why there were. We indicated that there were accidents, that there were facilities where we had troubles with locks at those facilities or accessing those stations and so on and so forth. They were all opened in the day today. That was the reason why we were not open first thing in the morning. And we may give you that statement because we gave those reasons why those stations were not open, the 5%. You raise an issue of ballot boxes, particularly in the Western Cape, which had broken seals. That's not our report. It's certainly not our report, and those matters, if they exist, we will deal with them at the time that we deal with. When do we expect 80% of the results? We expect that results are going to begin to stream in from here on into the early hours of the morning and all day tomorrow. Perhaps when we talk later, or well, at the next briefing, we would have had, because there are a number of instances where there have been queues, where those colleagues will allow the last person in the queue at 9 to vote before they begin to count. And we will give that. But to give you a gut feel, it is expected that tomorrow a majority of those results would have been in. There's a question about how will we measure the spoiled votes. In our country, there is no option on the ballot paper to say, I have no choice amongst all of these parties, and therefore I am spoiling. There is no such choice. A ballot is counted or is considered spoiled when the counter of that ballot is not in a position to decipher the voter's intention. In other words, you can't make up what the voter's intention was in marking that ballot. Either they left it completely open, they marked 3 parties, they marked across 4 parties, whatever the case might be. There is no clear intention of the voter, and that's how a ballot is spoiled. We record spoiled ballots because we account for the ballots that were issued to the voting station. I think those were the questions. I thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, let me wrap up this evening's press briefing. We'll later advise on when we're meeting tomorrow morning. In the meantime, results are trickling in for the 2014 national and provincial elections. Thank you for your partnership. See you tomorrow.
All right, so that's a press conference being held by the IEC. We heard from the chairperson, her deputy, and other commissioners, and Kate Babela, who's the communications person there at the IEC, issuing instructions now on top of our voice. But essentially what she's saying is that they will reconvene tomorrow, so we won't hear much more from the IEC this evening. But the results board has started to tick over very nicely, Francis.
It has, and the ANC clearly in the lead, but we're with a statistician from the CSIR, or speaking about the stats, and he would say don't read into these numbers, because this gives no indication of where we're going. But the ANC in the lead thus far, 1414. Few votes for some of the other parties. The first came in from Mount Aycliffe, and that was just one polling station that had closed, so a few hundred people, and that came in, and the bell rang, and a lot of excitement and a lot of buzz at the IEC. This is where the action is at tonight.
What is interesting is that everybody's got a vote so far, at least one, except for KISS
and the MF.
And the MF. So I wonder if the people who started those parties, and also PAL, I wonder who they are. Do you know who they are?
I have.
Oh, there we go.
Idea.
Ubuntu, not yet. But, this doesn't mean anything at all at this stage, as you were saying. This could be literally one tiny little station in the rural areas in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, that vote from Mount Aycliffe is in the rural part of that, so there's still the centre of town that still needs to come in, and that might show a different picture as well.
So what is happening now is they close the booth, the polling station, say it's at a school. Everybody starts counting, party officials are there, and I understand, and Ngolisa from the CSR perhaps can correct me here if I'm wrong, but the party officials are there, and they start counting. If everybody's happy, that goes through electronically to the IEC, and then there has to be a physical representation information of all the ballot papers that came in and what a portion went to each party and what number was spoiled. Once that's handed in, if there's no problem with that station, then the numbers can start appearing on this board already.
Yeah, that is correct. It's a two-pronged process with a check and a balance, in that even though at the station the presiding officers and the party agents can be in a position to say, yes, this is what is representative of the count that we had, you still need to reconcile the ballot papers that went into that voting station, because it does happen that ballot papers are sent from a neighboring voting station into there. So there's still that tedious process of reconciling the actual ballot papers, and having done that, taking all the documentation to the IEC office at a municipal
that is what's going to happen throughout this evening. Collation of those ballot papers. Counting has started, and we heard that in KZN, in one station, 1,200 people still in the queue at 7 o'clock. So if you were in the queue, then the station has not closed. So even voting continuing in some parts. Let's find out what's happening in Khayelitsha in Gauteng. We cross to Bulelani. Philip, Bulelani.
Welcome back again to Cape Town, where we are still. There are some still stations that are still open for those people who had come to the voting stations as part of the last-minute rush. Of course, many of them were returning from work, and that was the only time where they could use the tail end of the voting period. And of course, many of them have closed.